She was the most photographed mother in the world. In the White House images, she is always luminous. Caroline on her hip, John Jr. toddling across the Oval Office carpet, the whole tableau suggesting a family touched by something rare and complete. The cameras loved that story. They told it endlessly. The cameras weren't there on August 23, 1956. That morning, Jacqueline Kennedy woke at her stepfather's home in Newport, Rhode Island, covered in blood. She was 27 years old, 7 months pregnant with her first child, and she was rushed to Newport Hospital, where surgeons performed an emergency Caesarean section. The baby, a girl, arrived stillborn, having died in the womb. The New York Times ran a notice the following morning, 7 sentences buried on an inside page. Mrs. John F. Kennedy had lost the baby. Condition good. The world moved on in roughly 24 hours. Her husband was on a yacht in the Mediterranean. When word reached John Kennedy that his child had died, he was reportedly reluctant to end the trip. The baby was already gone. His friend, Senator George Smathers, put the political reality in plainer terms. "You better haul your ass back to your wife if you ever want to run for president." Kennedy caught the next flight home. He returned to a wife who had just survived a hemorrhage, delivered a stillborn daughter, and had been largely alone through all of it. This was also not Kennedy's first pregnancy loss with Jackie. She had miscarried in 1955, just a year into the marriage. 2 pregnancies, no living children, a husband who had needed a political calculation to board the plane. Jackie gave the baby a name privately, Arabella. The name means yielding to prayer. Nothing was filed officially. No birth certificate carried it. When Jackie later confirmed to historian Arthur Schlesinger that she and JFK had 5 children in 10 years, Arabella was one of the 5. But her name was so private that Jackie reportedly refused to use it on the burial marker, uncertain whether John had ever known it. The headstone at Arlington Cemetery reads simply, "Daughter." She wasn't buried at Arlington immediately. Arabella's remains were first placed in a Catholic cemetery in Rhode Island, largely invisible, largely unacknowledged. She was moved to Arlington in December 1963, after her father's assassination, after the world had already absorbed the Kennedy family's most public catastrophe. She lies there now alongside her father and her younger brother. 3 of Jackie's 5 pregnancies arranged in a row on a hillside above Washington. The child who should have come before Caroline is the child history forgot. Restoring her to the count matters because the story of Jackie Kennedy as a mother begins not in the White House, but in that Newport Hospital room, with a baby who never breathed and a husband who had to be argued into coming home. 15 months later, on November 27, 1957, Jacqueline gave birth to Caroline Bouvier Kennedy at New York Hospital. Caroline was healthy, full term, and almost immediately subject to a level of public attention that no child should have to absorb. Kennedy was a senator with presidential ambitions, and his young family was excellent politics. Jackie understood this and fought constantly to protect Caroline's privacy. Her negotiations with Look magazine photographer Stanley Tredick over access to the children were documented and contentious. JFK understood that the public adored seeing him as a father, and he wasn't above leveraging it. They compromised, uneasily, through Caroline's infancy and toddlerhood, trading limited access for some measure of control. In November 1960, that precarious arrangement became structurally impossible. JFK won the presidency by 112,827 votes out of 68 million cast. The margin was razor-thin, but the result was absolute. 17 days later, on November 25th, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. was born. 2 days after that, Caroline turned 3. In the span of 3 weeks, the family had acquired a president-elect, a newborn son, and a 3-year-old daughter. They were moving into the most surveilled address in America, and Jackie knew it. She spent the early White House years constructing a careful perimeter around her children's daily lives. Visitors to the private residence were vetted. Photographers were given specific, limited access. The iconic images of Caroline and John Jr. playing beneath the Oval Office desk or running across the South Lawn weren't accidental. They were the images Jackie chose to release, the ones that satisfied the public appetite while obscuring everything else. She was managing a celebrity that neither child had asked for and that neither could escape. Behind the lawn photographs and the Easter egg hunts, she became pregnant again in early 1963. Jackie spent most of that summer on Squaw Island, near the Kennedy compound on Cape Cod, resting and pulling back from official duties. On August 7th, she took Caroline to a riding lesson. On the drive back, Secret Service agent Paul Landis later recalled that Jackie said she needed to return to the house immediately. She had gone into labor 5.5 weeks early. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy was delivered by emergency Caesarean section at 12:52 that afternoon at Otis Air Force Base Hospital in Bourne, Massachusetts. The surgeon was Dr. John Walsh, the same physician who had delivered John Jr. in 1960. Patrick weighed 4 pounds and 10 ounces. His name carried both sides of his family. Patrick, for his great-grandfather Patrick Joseph Kennedy, Bouvier, for his mother's maiden name, stitched into his identity before he had stabilized. Within minutes of birth, doctors detected breathing difficulties. The diagnosis was hyaline membrane disease, now called infant respiratory distress syndrome, a condition in which underdeveloped lungs lack the surfactant needed to stay open between breaths. In 1963, the disease killed approximately 25,000 American children per year. Commercial infant ventilators didn't yet exist. The most advanced available treatment was a hyperbaric chamber, 31 feet long, 8 feet in diameter, pressurized with 100% oxygen to force air into collapsing lungs. Patrick was placed inside one. The New York Times described the apparatus as one of the newest interests of medical researchers. At the time, it was genuinely experimental. JFK shuttled between Otis Air Force Base and Boston Children's Hospital through the night, carrying updates to Jackie, who was still recovering from the Caesarean and had been deliberately kept away from television so she wouldn't learn the worst from a news broadcast. At one point during the vigil, Kennedy passed the room of another parent whose child was also critically ill. He stopped. He asked for pen and paper. He wrote the parent a note of sympathy. His aide Dave Powers recalled it later. There he was, with his own baby dying downstairs, but he had to take the time to write a note to that poor woman, asking her to keep her courage up. Patrick Kennedy's heart stopped at 4:04 in the morning on August 9th. He had lived 39 hours and 12 minutes. JFK was outside the hyperbaric chamber room with Robert Kennedy when it happened. Before Jackie left the hospital, she held Patrick's hand while he lay in the incubator. A small funeral mass was held on August 10th at the private chapel of Cardinal Richard Cushing in Boston. Caroline and John Jr. didn't attend. She was 5. He was 2. Archbishop Cushing performed the service. He would perform another Kennedy funeral 103 days after this one. The grief broke something open in the marriage. Press Secretary Pierre Salinger said that the death of their baby brought them even closer. Secret Service agent Clint Hill wrote in his 2012 memoir that after Patrick died, he and the other agents noticed a distinctly closer relationship, openly expressed, between the president and Mrs. Kennedy. Prior to this, they were much more restrained. The loss of Patrick seemed to be the catalyst to change all that. Historian Arthur Schlesinger wrote that Kennedy's marriage never seemed more solid than in the later months of 1963. Jackie fell into a depression that summer. Aristotle Onassis, a friend at this point, nothing more, invited her to recuperate on his yacht in the Aegean. JFK agreed, reluctantly, believing it would be good for her. She returned to the United States on October 17th and later told friends she regretted being away as long as she had been, that she'd been melancholy after the death of my baby. 3 days before the trip to Dallas in November, she and JFK exchanged anniversary gifts, marking 10 years of marriage. She gave him a new St. Christopher's medal. He had placed the original in Patrick's coffin. He gave her a gold and emerald ring. The green stone, he told her, represented the fighting spirit of the Irish he'd seen in their son's hard 39 hours. She was sitting beside him in the motorcade on November 22, 1963, when the shots were fired in Dealey Plaza. 3 days after Dallas, on November 25th, John F. Kennedy Jr. turned 3 years old. The state funeral was held that same day as the casket was carried out of St. Matthew's Cathedral in Washington. The little boy stepped forward and raised his right hand in a salute. NBC News Vice President Julian Goodman called it the most impressive shot in the history of television. The photograph went around the world within hours. John Jr. was 3 years old. He had been coached to salute. He did it perfectly, and the world wept, and the image became the one thing most people would always know about him. A child defined, permanently, by a single gesture performed before he could understand what it meant. Jackie buried Arabella and Patrick at Arlington alongside JFK on December 5, 1963. Then she started making decisions. In the fall of 1964, she left Washington. She bought a 14-room apartment at 1045th Avenue on the Upper East Side of Manhattan for $200,000 and enrolled her children in small, deliberately unpublicized schools. New York had no political machinery waiting to absorb the Kennedy children into its narrative. It had no constant parade of staffers and operatives reminding them daily of what they were supposed to represent. She was always a New Yorker first, presidential historian Paul Brandis would later say. The move was a calculation, not a retreat. Jackie was buying distance between her children and the gravitational field of Washington's Kennedy apparatus. After Robert Kennedy was shot in Los Angeles in June 1968, she made a starker calculation. She told friends, "If they're killing Kennedys, then my children are targets. I want to get out of this country." She moved Caroline and John Jr. to Aristotle Onassis's private island of Scorpios and married Onassis later that year. The world was scandalized. Jackie had done the math on what was happening to her family and acted accordingly. The years in New York worked, partially. Caroline grew up to become a lawyer and author. John Jr. graduated from New York University School of Law in 1989, passed the bar on his third attempt in 1990, and spent several years as an assistant district attorney in Manhattan. He co-founded George magazine in 1995, a political lifestyle publication that mixed celebrity culture with American civic life, and ran it until his death. From the outside, both children had built functional adult lives inside an impossible spotlight. Jackie's fear for John specifically was on record. She asked her longtime companion Maurice Templesman to do whatever he could to discourage her son from flying. She had watched the pattern. Joe Kennedy Jr. killed in a B-24 explosion over England in 1944. Kathleen Kennedy dead in a plane crash over France in 1948. Her husband shot in Dallas. Robert shot in Los Angeles. The accumulation wasn't metaphysical. It was a family that moved through the highest stakes environments in the world and paid the corresponding price. Jackie understood the actuarial reality. She wanted John on the ground. John F. Kennedy Jr. received his pilot's license from the Flight Safety Academy in Vero Beach, Florida, in April 1998. He had wanted to fly since he was a child. Jackie had been dead for nearly 4 years by the time he got his certificate. She died on May 19, 1994, at her Fifth Avenue apartment, with Caroline and John Jr. beside her. The diagnosis had been non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, confirmed in 1993, roughly a year between diagnosis and death, the disease moving faster than any intervention could track. She was 64. She had kept 2 children alive through the assassination of their father, the assassination of their uncle, a marriage she had used partly as a shield, a decade of Manhattan privacy carefully constructed and constantly eroded. She died, by any honest accounting, believing the central project of her life had succeeded. Caroline was established, John was established. Both were still here. 5 years and 2 months after Jackie's death, at 8:38 in the evening, on July 16, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr. took off from Essex County Airport in Caldwell, New Jersey, in a single-engine Piper Saratoga 2HP. He was flying to drop off his sister-in-law at Martha's Vineyard before continuing on to Hyannisport for a family wedding. Beside him were his wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, 33, and her sister, Lauren Bessette, 34, an investment banker from Morgan Stanley. The flight path crossed the Atlantic south of Cape Cod. Visibility was poor. A summer haze had reduced the horizon to almost nothing, the line between ocean and sky effectively invisible. Kennedy was a licensed pilot with logged hours, but he had limited experience flying without visual references at night. Aviation investigators later determined the cause of the crash was spatial disorientation, the vestibular system contradicting the instruments, the body insisting it knows which way is up when it doesn't. The plane entered a spiral and struck the water at high speed, approximately 7.5 miles southwest of Gay Head on Martha's Vineyard. The wreckage was located on the ocean floor on July 21st. All 3 bodies were recovered. At the request of Senator Edward Kennedy, their ashes were transported aboard the USS Briscoe on July 22nd and scattered at sea near the crash site. John F. Kennedy Jr. was 38 years old. He was buried in the same Atlantic he had sailed on as a child. Patrick Bouvier Kennedy died after 39 hours in a hyperbaric chamber and never saw the hospital's exit doors. Arabella Kennedy never breathed. John Jr. had 38 years, a law degree, a magazine, a marriage, and his mother's face in his features. And then the ocean took him too. 3 of Jackie's 4 children were gone. Patrick's death had left something forward-looking behind it. The public attention generated by the most prominent infant death in American history focused research urgency on hyaline membrane disease in ways the medical community had not previously prioritized. The National Institutes of Health increased funding for neonatal research after 1963. The journal Neonatology has identified Patrick's case as making that year a pivotal one in the field's history. The science that advanced in the years following his death enabled preterm infants to survive at gestational ages that would have been fatal in 1963. Patrick lived 39 hours. The research his death accelerated has saved hundreds of thousands of lives since. Jackie had tried to build walls against every other outcome: the New York apartment, the small schools, the island of Scorpios, the companion she asked to ground her son. None of it reached far enough. Caroline Kennedy is 66 years old. She served as the United States ambassador to Japan, beginning in 2013, the first woman to hold that position. Joe Biden appointed her ambassador to Australia in 2021. She has written books, maintained her father's presidential legacy through the Kennedy Library, and raised 3 children of her own. She has outlived 2 siblings who preceded her in death, one who never drew breath, and the mother who spent 40 years arranging the world between her children and the forces that kept taking Kennedys. She was 5 years old when the shots were fired in Dallas. She was old enough to understand that something was irreparably wrong, old enough to remember. What Jackie built measured against everything arrayed against it, was Caroline. Not the ambassador, not the author, the person. Someone still intact after losses that would have dismantled most people at the foundation. Jackie couldn't stop the pattern. She couldn't outrun it for John, but she gave her daughter something durable enough to carry every weight that followed. And Caroline has carried all of it. There was a photograph taken in the White House, one of the famous ones, Caroline and John Jr. sprinting toward their father across the Oval Office carpet, the president's face breaking into a smile, the tall windows casting afternoon light across everything. It looks like pure, uncomplicated joy. Jackie was 5 months pregnant with Patrick when it was taken. That is the picture the world kept. Jackie knew the full cost of it. Subscribe for more stories like this one.